The morning sun had just started to peek through the tall windows of the Hartwell Country Club when he pushed his cleaning cart through the back entrance. His name was Terrence, and for the past 6 months, this had been his life. Mopping floors, wiping down tables, emptying trash cans filled with champagne bottles and half-eaten plates of food that cost more than what he made in a week. He was 32 years old, but some days he felt twice that age. Life had a way of wearing a man down, and Terrence had been worn down plenty. The country club was the kind of place where rich people came to feel even richer. The walls were covered with paintings that probably cost more than most houses. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds hanging from the ceiling. And the members who walked through those doors carried themselves like they owned the world. Maybe they did. To them, Terrence was invisible, just another face in a uniform, someone who existed only to clean up after them and disappear before they had to acknowledge his presence. And most days that was fine with him. He had learned a long time ago that invisible was safe. Invisible meant no trouble. But there was one thing in that building that made it hard for him to stay invisible, even to himself. It sat in the corner of the grand ballroom, right next to the tall windows that overlooked the golf course. A Steinway grand piano, black and shiny like it had been polished just that morning. The keys were white as fresh snow, and even from across the room, Terrence could tell it was perfectly tuned. Every time he walked past it, something inside him stirred, something old, something he had tried very hard to forget. He would watch the members play it sometimes, usually during weekend parties or special events. A woman in a fancy dress would sit down and play some simple tune while her friends clapped politely. Or a man would show off with a clumsy version of a song he half remembered from childhood. They were never very good. Most of them treated that beautiful instrument like a toy, something to entertain their guests for a few minutes before moving on to the next drink. And every single time, Terrence would feel his fingers twitch, just slightly, like they remembered something his mind was trying to forget. He never told anyone about it. Who would he tell? The other workers at the club were nice enough, but they had their own problems. And the members certainly did not care about the janitor's life story, so he kept it buried, like a treasure chest sunk at the bottom of the ocean. But the truth was, Terrence had not always been a janitor. There was a time, many years ago, when music was everything to him. It started in a small church on the east side of Detroit. His grandmother used to take him there every Sunday, dressed in his best clothes, shoes polished until they shined. The church was not fancy like this country club. The paint was peeling, the pews were old and creaky, and the air conditioning never worked quite right in the summer. But they had a piano. It was an old upright, nothing special to look at. Some of the keys stuck, and it was always a little out of tune, but to a 5-year-old boy, it might as well have been magic. His grandmother noticed him staring at it one day after service, the way his eyes followed the pianist's hands as they moved across the keys, the way his little body swayed with the music like he was connected to it somehow. She asked the church pianist to teach him a few notes, just for fun, just to see. What happened next surprised everyone. Within weeks, little Terrence was playing songs by ear. He would hear something once and play it back almost perfectly. The church pianist said she had never seen anything like it. By the time he was 7, he was playing for Sunday service. By 10, he was performing at other churches around the city. People called him gifted, blessed, a prodigy. His grandmother would sit in the front pew every single time, her eyes filled with tears of pride. She would tell him that God had given him a gift, a special talent that most people only dream about, and she made him promise to never waste it. For years he kept that promise. He practiced every single day, sometimes for 6 or 7 hours straight. While other kids were outside playing basketball or riding bikes, Terrence was at the piano. It was not always easy. There were times when his fingers ached so bad he could barely make a fist. Times when he wanted to quit and be normal like everyone else. But his grandmother would not let him give up. She worked 2 jobs to pay for his lessons with real teachers. She saved every penny she could to buy him sheet music and books. And when he got accepted to one of the best music schools in the country at just 16 years old, she cried harder than he had ever seen her cry. It was supposed to be the beginning of everything. The start of a career that would take him around the world. Concert halls, recording studios, standing ovations from crowds who came just to hear him play. But life does not always go the way we plan. The phone call came during his 2nd year at school. His grandmother had collapsed at work. The doctor said it was her heart. She needed surgery, and even with insurance, the bills were going to be enormous. Terrence did not even have to think about it. He left school the very next day, packed his bags, said goodbye to his teachers, and took a bus back to Detroit. Some people tried to talk him out of it. His professors said he was making a mistake, that opportunities like this do not come twice, that he was throwing away his future, but Terrence did not care about his future. He only cared about her. For the next 3 years, he was by her side. He worked odd jobs during the day and took care of her at night. He held her hand during the hard days, made her laugh during the good ones. And slowly, piece by piece, he watched the woman who raised him fade away. She passed on a quiet Tuesday morning in April. The sun was shining, and birds were singing outside her window. Her last words to him were about the piano, about the gift, about the promise. After that, something inside Terrence broke. He could not look at a piano without thinking of her, without feeling the weight of everything he had lost. So he stopped playing. He told himself it was just for a little while, just until the pain went away. But days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. 11 years to be exact. Now here he was, mopping floors at a country club, watching strangers butcher beautiful music on an instrument they did not deserve, living a life so far from the one he once dreamed about that it felt like a different person's story. He told himself he was okay with it, that this was just how things turned out sometimes, that not everyone gets a happy ending. But every time he walked past that piano, every time he heard those keys, he felt something stir deep inside him, something that was not quite dead, something that was just waiting. Waiting for what, he did not know, but he was about to find out. It was the first Saturday of October, and the country club was buzzing with excitement. The annual charity gala was the biggest event of the year. Women in designer gowns floated through the ballroom like they were walking on clouds. Men in expensive suits laughed too loud and shook hands like they were closing business deals. Champagne flowed like water, and the smell of fancy food filled every corner of the building. Terrence had been working since 5 in the morning to help prepare for this night, setting up tables, arranging chairs, making sure every glass sparkled and every surface was spotless. By the time the guests started arriving, his back ached and his feet throbbed inside his worn-out work shoes. But he was not done yet. His job during the gala was to stay out of sight as much as possible while keeping things clean. Pick up empty glasses, wipe down tables when people moved away. Disappear before anyone noticed he was there. He was good at disappearing. The ballroom looked like something out of a movie that night. Golden lights cast a warm glow over everything. A jazz band played soft music in the corner, and right there, in its usual spot by the tall windows, sat the Steinway piano. Tonight it had been decorated with white flowers, like it was the centerpiece of the whole event. Terrence tried not to look at it. He really did. But every time he passed by, his eyes would drift in that direction. His fingers would curl slightly at his sides. That old familiar ache would rise up in his chest, and he would have to force himself to look away. Keep your head down, he told himself. Just get through the night. For a few hours, everything went smoothly. The guests ate and drank and danced. Terrence moved through the crowd like a ghost, collecting empty glasses and used napkins without anyone giving him a second glance. He was invisible, just the way he liked it. But then he made a mistake. He stopped too long near the piano. A woman had just finished playing some simple melody, and the small crowd around her was clapping politely. Terrence was supposed to grab the empty champagne glasses from a nearby table, but instead he found himself frozen in place, staring at those black and white keys, remembering. He did not notice the man watching him. His name was Bradford Wellington III. At least that is what everyone called him. He was the kind of man who made sure everyone knew exactly how much money he had. His watch alone probably cost more than what Terrence made in a year. He walked with his chin up and his chest out like the whole world was supposed to bow down to him. Bradford had been drinking heavily all night. His face was red, and his voice was getting louder with every glass. He was surrounded by a group of his wealthy friends, all of them laughing at his jokes, whether they were funny or not. When Bradford spotted Terrence staring at the piano, his eyes lit up with a cruel kind of amusement. "Well, well, well," he said loudly, loud enough for people nearby to turn and look. "Look at this, everybody. The cleaning boy seems to have a thing for our piano." Terrence's stomach dropped. He quickly looked away and tried to move toward the kitchen, but Bradford was not finished. "Hey, you! Janitor!" Bradford called out, waving his champagne glass in the air. "Yes, you. Come over here." Terrence stopped. Every instinct told him to keep walking, to pretend he did not hear. But people were watching now, a dozen pairs of eyes fixed on him, waiting to see what would happen. He turned around slowly. Bradford grinned like a cat that had just caught a mouse. "I saw you looking at that piano like it was your long-lost lover. Tell me, do you play?" Terrence felt his throat tighten. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I was just cleaning up." "Oh, come on now," Bradford said, walking closer. His friends followed behind him, smirking. "Do not be shy. We are all friends here. Do you play or not?" "I used to," Terrence heard himself say. He did not know why he said it. The words just slipped out before he could stop them. Bradford's eyebrows shot up in exaggerated surprise. "You used to play? Oh, this is too good." He turned to his friends. "Did you hear that? The janitor used to play piano." Laughter rippled through the group. More people were watching now. Terrence could feel their eyes on him burning into his skin. "Well then," Bradford said, gesturing grandly toward the piano. "Why don't you give us a little performance? Show us what you got." "Sir, I really should get back to work," Terrence said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nonsense!" Bradford grabbed his arm and started pulling him toward the piano. "Come on, everybody wants to see this. Right, folks?" A few people cheered, others laughed nervously. The club manager stood in the corner, watching with a worried expression but doing nothing to stop it. Terrence found himself standing in front of the Steinway. The white flowers seemed to mock him. The keys gleamed under the golden lights, waiting. "Go on," Bradford said, pushing him toward the bench. "Play us a song. I bet you know Chopsticks, right? Or maybe Mary Had a Little Lamb." More laughter. Someone in the back shouted, "Play Hot Cross Buns." Bradford's wife pulled out her phone and started recording. "This is going to be hilarious," she whispered to the woman next to her. Terrence stood there, frozen. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hands were shaking. Every face in that crowd was looking at him with the same expression: amusement, pity, contempt, like he was some kind of circus animal brought out for their entertainment. For a moment he thought about running, just turning around and walking straight out the door. He could quit this job tonight, find something else, anything else. He did not need this. But then something strange happened. A voice echoed in his mind, soft and warm and familiar, his grandmother's voice, the way it sounded on those Sunday mornings in that little church in Detroit. "God gave you a gift, baby. Do not you ever let nobody take it from you." Terrence felt something shift inside him. The shaking in his hands slowed. The noise of the crowd seemed to fade into the background. All he could see was the piano. All he could feel was that old familiar pull, the one he had been running from for 11 years. Slowly, he sat down on the bench. The crowd went quiet for a moment, then erupted in giggles and whispers. Bradford clapped his hands in delight. "Oh, this is going to be good," he announced. "Everyone, get your phones out. You are not going to want to miss this." More phones appeared. Dozens of tiny cameras pointed at Terrence, ready to capture his humiliation. He looked down at the keys. 88 of them, arranged in a perfect pattern of black and white. He had not touched a piano in over a decade. His fingers felt stiff and clumsy. What if he had forgotten everything? What if he sat here and made a fool of himself in front of all these people? But then he thought about his grandmother, about all those hours she worked to pay for his lessons, about the way she would sit in the front pew with tears running down her cheeks, about the promise he made to her all those years ago. He placed his fingers on the keys. The crowd held its breath. Bradford was grinning from ear to ear, phone raised, waiting for the disaster. And then Terrence began to play. The first note rang out like a bell in a silent church. It was soft, almost hesitant, like a man dipping his toe into water after years of staying dry. But even that single note was enough to make a few people in the crowd pause. There was something different about it, something that did not match the clumsy performance they were expecting. Then came the second note, and the third. And suddenly Terrence's fingers were moving across the keys like they had never stopped. He was playing Chopin, Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano, the kind of music that professional pianists spend years trying to master, the kind of music that separates the gifted from the truly extraordinary. And Terrence was playing it like he was born for it. The laughter in the room died instantly. It did not fade slowly or trail off into awkward silence. It just stopped, like someone had pulled the plug on a machine. Bradford's grin melted off his face. His phone was still raised, still recording, but his hand had gone completely still. His mouth hung open slightly, and for the first time all night, he had nothing to say. The music filled the ballroom like a living thing. It started gentle and melancholy, like a memory of something beautiful that had been lost. The notes floated through the air, wrapping around every person in the room, demanding their attention without raising its voice. Then it began to build. Terrence's hands moved faster now. His left hand laid down deep, powerful chords while his right hand danced across the higher keys with impossible speed. The melody twisted and turned, climbing higher and higher before crashing down like waves against rocks. People stopped what they were doing. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Champagne glasses were lowered and forgotten. The jazz band in the corner had stopped playing, their instruments hanging silent at their sides. Even the servers carrying trays of food stood frozen in place, unable to look away. A woman near the front of the crowd brought her hand to her mouth. Her eyes were wide, glistening with the beginning of tears. She did not know why she was crying. She just knew that whatever she was witnessing was something rare, something she might never see again. Terrence was no longer in the ballroom. In his mind, he was somewhere else entirely. He was back in that little church in Detroit, sitting on the creaky piano bench with his grandmother watching from the front pew. He could smell the old wood and the faint perfume she always wore. He could feel her pride wrapping around him like a warm blanket. The music poured out of him like water from a broken dam. 11 years of silence, 11 years of grief and loss and buried dreams. It all came rushing out through his fingertips, transformed into something beautiful. The piece grew more intense. The notes came faster, more urgent. Terrence's whole body moved with the music now. He swayed and leaned, his eyes closed, completely lost in the sound. His fingers flew across the keys with a precision that seemed almost superhuman. Bradford took a step back, then another. His friends were no longer laughing. They were staring at the janitor they had mocked just minutes ago, and their faces showed something that looked a lot like shame. The middle section of the piece was the hardest. It required the kind of technical skill that most pianists only dream of. Rapid arpeggios, complex harmonies, passages that demanded both power and delicacy at the same time. Terence played through it all without a single mistake, but it was not just the technical brilliance that captivated the room. It was the emotion behind every note. You could hear the pain in the music, the longing, the love. This was not just a man playing piano. This was a man telling his story without words, and everyone in that ballroom could feel it. An older gentleman in the back of the crowd quietly removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. His wife put her arm around him, her own cheeks wet with tears. The piece built to its climax. The music swelled and crashed, filling every corner of the room with sound. It was overwhelming and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. Some people had to look away, not because they were bored, but because the emotion was too much. And then, just when it seemed like the music could not possibly get any more powerful, Terence did something unexpected. He transitioned into something else, something that was not Chopin, something that nobody in that room had ever heard before. It was his own composition, a piece he had written years ago during the darkest time of his life, right after his grandmother passed away. He had never played it for anyone, never even written it down. It had lived only in his memory, buried alongside all the other things he had tried to forget. The new melody was simpler than the Chopin, but somehow even more moving. It started quiet and sad, like a lullaby for someone who would never wake up. But slowly, gradually, it began to change. Notes of hope crept in between the sorrow. The tempo lifted slightly. The darkness made room for light. It was the story of his grandmother, her strength, her sacrifice, her unshakable faith in him, and it was the story of his own journey, the heights he had reached, the depths he had fallen to, and the spark that had never quite gone out, no matter how hard he tried to extinguish it. The ballroom was completely silent, except for the music. No one moved, no one whispered. They just listened, caught in a spell that none of them fully understood. Bradford had backed all the way to the edge of the crowd. His phone had dropped to his side, the recording forgotten. His face was pale, and for the first time in perhaps his entire privileged life, he looked truly small. The composition built to its own climax. Terence's fingers crashed down on the keys with all the strength he had, pouring out every ounce of emotion left inside him. The music soared and swelled, filling the room until it felt like the walls might burst. And then, softly, gently, it began to fade. The final notes were quiet, almost whispered, like a prayer at the end of a long, hard day. Terence held the last chord for a moment, letting it ring out into the silence. Then he lifted his hands from the keys. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The ballroom was frozen in time, suspended in the echo of what they had just witnessed. Then one person started to clap. It was the older gentleman in the back, the one who had wiped his eyes with his handkerchief. His claps were slow at first, deliberate, full of respect. Then someone else joined in, and another. And another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. It was not polite clapping. It was not the kind of applause you give to be nice. It was thunderous, overwhelming, the kind of applause that shakes the walls and makes your chest vibrate. People were standing, cheering. Some were openly crying and did not even care who saw. Strangers were looking at each other with expressions of pure amazement, as if to confirm that, yes, they had really just seen what they thought they saw. Terence sat on the bench, his hands trembling, his chest heaving. He did not know what to do. He had not expected any of this. He had just wanted them to stop laughing. He had just wanted to prove, maybe just to himself, that he still had something left inside him worth saving. But as the applause washed over him, something strange happened. A woman pushed through the crowd. She was well-dressed but not flashy, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression of intense focus. She walked straight up to the piano, ignoring the chaos around her, and stopped right in front of Terrence. When she spoke, her voice was calm but urgent. "Who are you?" she asked. "And where on earth have you been hiding?" Terrence looked up at the woman standing before him. The applause was still echoing through the ballroom, but it sounded distant now, like thunder from a faraway storm. His heart was still pounding. His fingers were still trembling from the music that had poured out of them. "I asked you a question," the woman said. Her voice was not harsh, but there was an urgency to it, like she had just discovered something valuable and was afraid it might disappear. "Who are you?" For a moment, Terrence could not find his words. He was still trying to understand what had just happened. 11 years of silence, and now this. It felt like waking up from a very long sleep. "I work here," he finally said. His voice came out rough and unsteady. "I am the janitor." The woman stared at him like he had just told her the sky was green. "The janitor," she repeated slowly. "You play like that, and you are working as a janitor." Before Terrence could respond, a small crowd had gathered around the piano. People were pushing closer, trying to get a better look at him. Some had their phones out, still recording. Others were whispering to each other with expressions of disbelief. "That was incredible," a man in a gray suit said, shaking his head. "Absolutely incredible. Where did you study?" "I have never heard anyone play like that," a woman in a red dress added. "Not even at the symphony." Questions came from every direction. "How long have you been playing? Why are you working here? Where have you been?" Terrence felt overwhelmed. He was not used to being seen, let alone being the center of attention. The woman who had first approached him held up her hand, and somehow the crowd went quiet. There was something about her that commanded respect, an authority that did not need to raise its voice. "Give him some space," she said firmly. Then she turned back to Terrence and pulled a small white card from her purse. "My name is Victoria Chen. I am a music producer. Classical mostly, but I work with artists across many genres." She handed him the card. Terrence took it with shaking fingers. The card was simple and elegant, with her name and contact information printed in clean black letters. "I have worked with some of the best pianists in the world," Victoria continued. "I have heard performances at Carnegie Hall, at the Sydney Opera House, at concert venues across Europe. And I am telling you right now, what you just played belongs on those stages." Terrence did not know what to say. He looked down at the card in his hands, then back up at her face. She was serious, completely, utterly serious. "I do not understand," he said quietly. "I have not played in over 11 years. I thought I had forgotten everything." Victoria shook her head. "You do not forget a gift like that. It might go to sleep for a while, but it does not disappear." She leaned closer, her eyes searching his face. "But I need to know your story." "Because people do not just become janitors when they play like you do. Something happened. What was it?" The crowd around them had grown quiet. Even Bradford, who had been trying to slink toward the exit, stopped to listen. Everyone wanted to know. Everyone needed to understand how this man in a worn uniform had just delivered a performance that would haunt their memories for years to come. Terrence took a deep breath. He had not talked about this in a very long time, but something about the way Victoria looked at him made him feel like it was finally safe to speak. "I grew up in Detroit," he began, "on the east side. We did not have much, but we had a church, and that church had a piano." The words started coming slowly, like water from a tap that had been shut off for too long, but once they started, they would not stop. He told them about his grandmother, how she noticed his gift when he was just 5 years old, how she worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to pay for his lessons, how she believed in him when nobody else did. He told them about the years of practice, the competitions he won, the teachers who said he was special, the scholarship to one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. "I was 16 when I got accepted," he said. "It was supposed to be the beginning of everything. My grandmother cried for 3 days straight when the letter came. She said it was the proudest moment of her life." His voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. "I was in my second year when I got the phone call. My grandmother had collapsed at work. Her heart. They said she needed surgery, and even with insurance, the bills were going to be more than we could ever afford." The ballroom was completely silent now. Not a whisper, not a clink of glasses, just Terrence's voice, steady and sad. "I left school the next day. My professors begged me to stay. They said I was throwing away my future, but I did not care about my future. I only cared about her." He paused, looking down at his hands, the same hands that had just created such beautiful music, the same hands that had held his grandmother's during her final days. "I took care of her for 3 years, worked any job I could find during the day and stayed by her side at night. I watched her get weaker and weaker, and there was nothing I could do to stop it." A woman in the crowd let out a soft sob. Even some of the men were blinking rapidly, trying to hold back tears. "She passed away on a Tuesday morning in April," Terrence continued. "The sun was shining, birds were singing outside her window, and her last words to me were about the piano, about my gift. She made me promise to never give up on it." He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it, just old pain. "I broke that promise. After she was gone, I could not even look at a piano without falling apart, so I stopped. I told myself it was just for a little while, just until the pain went away. But the pain never went away, and a little while turned into 11 years. Victoria had not moved. Her eyes were fixed on him, shining with emotion. "I ended up here," Terrence said, gesturing at the ballroom around them, "cleaning floors, emptying trash, watching other people live the life I was supposed to have, and every single day, I would walk past that piano and remember everything I lost." He looked at Victoria directly now. "Tonight, when that man dragged me up here to make fun of me, something snapped. I heard my grandmother's voice in my head, and I could not let her down again. Not this time." The silence stretched on for a long moment. Then Victoria reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. "You did not let her down," she said softly. "What you did tonight took more courage than most people will ever have in their entire lives. You honored her memory in the most beautiful way possible." She straightened up and took a step back. When she spoke again, her voice was all business. "I want to work with you. I want to help you get back everything you lost and more. Recording contracts, concert performances, the whole thing. You have a gift that the world deserves to hear." Terrence felt dizzy. This was too much, too fast. 20 minutes ago, he was picking up empty champagne glasses, and now a major music producer was offering him his dreams on a silver platter. "I do not know," he said honestly. "It has been so long. I'm not sure I am ready for any of that." Victoria smiled. It was the first time she had smiled since approaching him. "You just played one of the hardest pieces in classical music after 11 years of not touching a piano," she said. "Trust me, you are ready." She pressed the card more firmly into his hand. "Take some time. Think about it. But do not take too long. Opportunities like this do not come around twice." As she walked away, Terrence looked down at the card one more time. His hands were still shaking, but this time, it was not from fear, it was from hope, and somewhere far away he could almost hear his grandmother laughing with joy. 3 months later, Terrence stood backstage at Carnegie Hall. He was wearing a tailored black suit that fit him perfectly. His shoes were polished until they gleamed. His hands, the same hands that had mopped floors and scrubbed toilets just weeks ago, were now moisturized and manicured. He looked like a completely different person. But inside, He was still the same man, still nervous, still wondering if he deserved to be here. The dressing room was quiet except for the distant hum of the audience gathering on the other side of the curtain. 2,800 seats, and every single one of them was filled. The concert had sold out in 48 minutes. 48 minutes. Victoria had called him that day with disbelief in her voice. She said she had never seen anything like it. The video from that night at the country club had changed everything. Someone in the crowd had uploaded it to social media the very next morning. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Within days, it had millions of views. News outlets picked up the story. The janitor who stunned a room full of wealthy guests. The hidden prodigy who had not played in over a decade. The man who silenced his bullies with nothing but his fingers and a piano. People could not get enough of it. Terrence had watched the video only once. It was strange seeing himself from the outside, watching the exact moment when he sat down at the bench, watching Bradford's smug face crumble into shock, watching the tears in people's eyes as the music washed over them. But the part that got him was at the very end, when the applause erupted and the camera zoomed in on his face. He looked lost, overwhelmed, like a man who had just been pulled from the ocean after years of drowning. In a way, that was exactly what had happened. The weeks after that night were a blur. Victoria worked fast. She got him signed with a major record label. She arranged interviews and photo shoots and meetings with people whose names he had only ever read in magazines. She found him an apartment in the city and made sure he had everything he needed to focus on his music. And through it all, she never once treated him like a charity case. She treated him like what he was, an artist, a talent, a man with something extraordinary to offer the world. The hardest part was learning to believe it himself. There were days when he woke up in his new apartment and forgot where he was, days when he expected to hear the alarm for his shift at the country club, days when he would catch his reflection in the mirror and not recognize the man staring back at him. But every time the doubt crept in, he would sit down at the piano Victoria had placed in his living room, and he would play. And the moment his fingers touched the keys, everything made sense again. Tonight was the biggest night of his life. His debut concert at one of the most famous venues in the world. Critics and journalists and music lovers from across the globe had come to see if the hype was real, to see if the janitor from the viral video could deliver when it mattered most. A knock on the dressing room door pulled him from his thoughts. 5 minutes, Mr. Terrence, a stagehand said politely. Mr. That still felt strange, but he nodded and thanked the young man, then turned back to the mirror. He thought about Bradford Wellington III. After the video went viral, someone had dug up his identity. The comments were brutal. People called him every name in the book. His own country club had asked him to resign his membership to avoid further embarrassment. Last Terrence heard, Bradford had deleted all his social media and was lying low somewhere far from the spotlight. Terrence did not feel happy about it. He did not feel satisfaction or revenge or any of the things people might expect. He just felt nothing. Bradford was not important anymore. Maybe he never was. What mattered was the music. What mattered was the gift. What mattered was the woman who had believed in a scared little boy from Detroit when nobody else did. Terrence reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was old and worn, the edges soft from years of handling. His grandmother smiled up at him from the picture, her eyes full of the same warmth he remembered from childhood. He had found the photo while packing up his old apartment. It had been tucked inside a book she had given him years ago. On the back, in her neat handwriting, were the words she used to say to him before every performance. Play with your whole heart, baby. That is all anyone can ever ask. His eyes grew wet, but he did not wipe the tears away. He let them fall. She deserved his tears. She deserved everything. This is for you, Grandma, he whispered to the photograph. I kept my promise, I am sorry it took so long." He tucked the photo back into his pocket, right over his heart. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the stage. The roar of the crowd hit him like a wave. 2,800 people rose to their feet the moment he stepped into the spotlight. The applause was deafening, overwhelming. It crashed over him and filled every corner of that legendary hall. Terrence walked slowly toward the grand piano at the center of the stage. It was even more beautiful than the one at the country club, a Steinway Model D, the finest concert piano in the world. It waited for him like an old friend. He sat down on the bench and adjusted the microphone they had set up for him. He had asked for a moment to speak before he played. Victoria had thought it was a nice touch. The crowd fell silent. Every eye in the building was fixed on him. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but soft. "Thank you for being here tonight. I know a lot of you saw the video. You know my story. You know where I came from and what I have been through." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But there is one part of the story that most people do not know. The reason I am here tonight. The reason I ever learned to play at all." He took a deep breath. "When I was 5 years old, my grandmother took me to a little church in Detroit. They had an old piano that was always out of tune. But to me, it was the most magical thing I had ever seen. My grandmother noticed me staring at it, and she asked the church pianist to teach me a few notes." He smiled at the memory. "She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to pay for my lessons. She sacrificed everything so I could chase this dream. And when I gave it up to take care of her, she never stopped believing that one day I would come back to it." His voice wavered slightly, but he pushed through. "She passed away 11 years ago, and I spent every single day since then running from the gift she gave me, running from the pain of losing her, running from the promise I made." He looked out at the sea of faces. Some were crying. Some were holding their breath. "Tonight, I stop running. Tonight, I play for her, and I hope wherever she is, she can hear me." He turned to face the piano, placed his fingers on the keys, and in the silence of that great hall, surrounded by thousands of strangers who had become witnesses to his resurrection, Terrence began to play. The music rose like a sunrise after the longest night. It filled Carnegie Hall from floor to ceiling, from wall to wall. It told the story of a little boy and his grandmother, of sacrifice and loss, of darkness and hope, of a gift that refused to die. And somewhere, in a place beyond time and space, an old woman sat in the front pew of a little church in Detroit. She was smiling, and she was so proud.